Wow, thank you. It's such an honor to be able to speak at the North Texas Recovery Conference and Film Festival. I want to thank Robert Ashford, I want to thank Eagle Peer Recovery, and I want to thank everyone at the university who has given me this opportunity. I especially want to thank Robert for my Party Sober Mean Green t-shirt. Yeah. And I am proud to say I will be wearing this t-shirt at my very first UNT football game this Saturday. Rah! Rah! It's kind of funny. I think about the term party sober on that shirt, and I think back on my life, and sober had, for 75% of my adult life, sober had nothing to do with it. It was all about partying and nothing about sober, and a lot about addiction. And I think back at my resume to that, and here it is. Let me give you my resume of dysfunction. By 21, I was an alcoholic. By 27, I was a cocaine addict. By 30, I was a steroid addict. Yes, people get addicted to steroids. By 45, I had become suicidal, only to be rescued literally at the last second. By 46, 2 trips, not one, but 2 trips to a psychiatric facility. Let's not forget 3 failed marriages. One more, I get a free set of steak knives. And of course, I was also anorexic and bulimic for 27 years before I went into recovery, becoming anorexic as an 18-year-old freshman at Penn State, and then becoming bulimic and staying that way. It's funny, when I talk to groups, I'll say, you know, I'm a recovering alcoholic. I got a buddy in 12-step. I'm a recovering drug addict. Yeah, I got a buddy in rehab, whatever. I'm a recovering steroid addict. Legalize them, who cares? I'm a recovering bulimic. Silence. All the guys kind of take a step backwards. I'm like, guys, it's not contagious. It's an uncomfortable topic for men to even listen to. That's the shame. That's the stigma of eating disorders. Guys just don't want to talk about it. But when in fact 30% of all those suffering from eating disorders are in fact men. Eating disorders have the highest mortality rate of any psychological illness. I bet you didn't know that. Or maybe you did in this group. And so finally, when I hit my lowest point on April 7th, 2007, it became clear to me that I had to make some changes. But how did I get to that point? It's been a roller coaster. What got me up on this stage? What was the life path that took me from a small child with no addictions, no dysfunction, to this person who couldn't even bear to look at his reflection in the mirror, who was so horrified of his reflection that he saw no other option but to end his life in 2005? Well, we have to go all the way back to the dark ages of the baby boomer era of 1961, when I was born. 3 television stations, no internet, way before Al Gore invented the internet. You know, no cable, that's right, there was life before cable. And very defined gender roles. You really weren't talking about addiction. You really weren't talking about depression. You certainly weren't talking about eating disorders. And you certainly weren't talking about male self-image, about men not feeling good about themselves. Because our fathers didn't talk about those things, if there's anyone here who can identify with that. The greatest generation, they came back from World War II and the Korean War, men were men. Men were the wage earners, men were the hunters, men watched football. You know, men didn't stick their fingers down their throat. Men didn't talk about depression, men didn't starve themselves. You know, that's what women did. And so, as the middle of 3 children, a lot of people know my older brother Mark, Shark Tank and Dallas Mavericks. I had a younger brother, Jeff. I was typical middle child syndrome. Mark, as the oldest, was out selling garbage bags at age 10, doing this, doing that. You knew he was an entrepreneur at the youngest age, and you knew what he was going to be, and he kind of became that and a little bit more. My younger brother, as the last born, was what you might expect from that. He was the sort of the rebel, into wrestling, into the sport, into drinking, beer drinking parties at McDonald's after school. I was the quiet, shy middle child, just brutal middle child syndrome. All I cared about is what people thought of me. All I cared about what was said to me. Anything that was said to me, I internalized it. And that became a problem because unfortunately, I had a very difficult relationship with my mom. There was a lot of what we call now fat shaming in my household. Back then, it was just nothing. My mom would say things to me, well, if you eat too much Chef Boyardee ravioli. Do they still have that? I love Chef Boyardee ravioli. I love it. Now it's a trigger, but I still think about Chef Boyardee ravioli. It's in my dreams. But she'd say, Brian, if you eat too much of that Chef Boyardee ravioli, you're going to turn out to be a fat pig. And when I came home with bad grades from school in Pittsburgh, she'd call me a dumb bunny. And these were the things she had said to her by her mom. And these were the things her mom had said to her by her mom. These things are often generational in nature. And when you're not given the tools to change, it just runs downhill. And it did. And as you might expect, these kind of words on a middle child syndrome started having an effect. And I started eating more Chef Boyardee ravioli because I was depressed. And food was my crutch. And I turned from a kind of little bit heavy 12, 13-year-old to an obese 13-year-old, going to about 270 by the time I got to middle school, junior high. And as you might expect, kids can be kids. The bullying started at school. Brian, you're a fat pig. Brian, get a bra. And as you might expect, what kids do, you develop a very self-deprecating sense of humor as a wall, to put up that wall. Yeah, I'm heading over to Sears right now. I know I need a bra. I'm so fat. Yeah, my belts are out to here. It's hilarious. But you're dying inside, but you put up this wall of laughter, hoping that if you're self-deprecating enough, the bullies and these people you kind of hang around on the fringe will accept you. And finally, you'll be included. Finally, you'll be accepted. Acceptance, I have learned that acceptance can be as powerful a drug as any artificial substance to get people to take destructive actions against their own body, the desire to be accepted. And so I started getting heavier, and I'm getting it at school, I'm getting it at home. I didn't want to tell my brothers because guys don't talk about those things. I didn't want to tell my father. Well, they say, why didn't you tell your father? Because when you're a 13, 14-year-old little boy and you're sleeping at night in that room and your parents are there next to you, that is your unconditional sense of security that nothing can hurt you, that you will wake up in the morning in that bed and that the monsters will stay at bay. If I told my father that, he's going to throw me out of the house. Where will I live, with my little pole and little bag? Who's going to take care of me? Who's going to feed me? So I kept my mouth shut, and I internalized it. And it all kind of culminated one day in junior high school in Pittsburgh when my brother had given me these gold shiny disco pants. I see a couple people that remember the disco era here, but not many of you. John Travolta and Saturday Night Fever. But he had given me these kind of gold shiny satin disco pants, and Mark had given them to me, and I loved him. I loved my brother. So I wore them to school all the time. I was so proud of these pants. The problem was Mark wasn't a big guy. Okay, he wasn't a big guy. These pants were tight. My butt looked like 15 cats, in a pair of shiny gold disco pants. Nah, it just wasn't happening. I was not happening in those days. And the kids made fun of him, and that was fine. And one day, I'm walking home with these kids who make fun of me from school, once again, just sort of hanging around the outside, just sort of hanging on, hoping you can catch some of that popularity that you want to define yourself with, that acceptance, being one of the guys, going on a date, holding a girl's hand, going to the prom, finally getting to kiss my first girl. And you want all those things so bad and want to be accepted to get those things. But no, they're just making fun, and they're making fun of my gold pants. The same old insults and taunts. But then all of a sudden, I wonder what Brian would look like without those pants. I hear that. Then all of a sudden, someone's pulling at him. Then all of a sudden, another guy's pulling at him. The next thing I know, they had all joined in and ripped those pants off me to my tighty whities, threw them in the street a mile from home. And they all go on laughing. And so I had to go and gather those pants up in the street and walk on home, embarrassed. I was so ashamed when I got home, I just threw them in the garbage, hoping no one would ever say a thing. And no one did. But I was ashamed that I did not know how to stand up to bullies. I was ashamed that I had disappointed my brother. And I was ashamed because they had validated that I was a fat pig and a dumb bunny, what my mom had told me all the time. And I remember that like it was yesterday. That was so traumatic that I could go to that spot in Mount Lebanon, Pennsylvania, and show you exactly where it happened today. And when I go home, I drive by that spot, and I'm sad sometimes. And I'm sad for the lost childhood of that little boy in those few moments. And it was then that I started to really see myself differently. Every time I looked in the mirror, I would start to see just this fat pig who couldn't stand up for himself, whether it was a car window, whether it was a mall shop window, the beginnings of body dysmorphic disorder as a teenager. Taking a smaller, non-existent defect and exaggerating it to the point where it affects your ability to function in life. That is body dysmorphic disorder. And for some people, for me it was my stomach. For some people, they abuse plastic surgery. I did that too. Some people get eating disorders. I did that too. I had plastic surgery until I went broke. That's the only reason I stopped. They abuse alcohol. That's me. They abuse drugs. Me again, and steroids. So I went through every destructive behavior almost you could associate with body dysmorphic disorder, but over the course of my life. But in high school, I just kind of muddled on through, and I isolated. I stayed in my bedroom because I didn't want to face that fat, bullied little boy, and I didn't want to be made fun of anymore. And I went on to Penn State, and I was so happy to go to Penn State University in 1979. Their football team wasn't that good then, but I wanted to get away from my mom. I wanted to get away from the bullies. It was going to be a new start for Brian where everyone would love me. I would be accepted. I would finally get to kiss a girl, which I hadn't even done. I wanted so badly to have some sort of relationship with a guy or even a woman, with a woman or even a guy, or doesn't matter, but just acceptance, just to be accepted. And I just didn't see myself ever getting that. And then one day, as I was moving into Penn State, into the dorm, I'm looking out the window. It's a beautiful fall day. My father had just dropped me off. And I make eye contact with this girl. And she's staring at me, this brown-haired girl, just curly hair, and I remember it like it was yesterday. And I'm like, oh my goodness, a girl's making eye contact with me. You know, I'm gonna get to go to McDonald's with a girl. She's gonna come over, she's gonna talk to me. This is great. Her smile wasn't a smile, it was a smirk. She turned to her two friends, and it was like a boom from God. I heard, ugly, ugly. And I'm like, wow. I felt like I'd just been pantsed again. And these things happen to kids. I'm no different. They happen. But I bring this incident up because it was a pivotal moment in how I thought about my body. It was at that moment I decided my whole life was out of control. I had nothing, there was nothing I can control. I couldn't control what people thought about me. I was hated again. I was going to get bullied again. What do I have control over? Food. But I didn't want to get heavy. They're heavier than I was, because to me I associated that with the bullying from my mom and at school. I'll start starving myself. As an 18-year-old freshman at Penn State, I became anorexic. And of course, that didn't get me acceptance. That didn't make me feel any better about myself. Every time I looked in the mirror, there was still this fat 13-year-old little boy. A year later, I became bulimic. Didn't help. I would engage in the bulimic acts, and for 2 seconds, I would feel like I was going to be accepted. But as anyone who's been through it knows, once that act is over, what fills that void? Shame, intense shame. And this was 1981. Okay, this was before Karen Carpenter even had passed away, kind of bringing anorexia for women into the national spotlight in the pre-digital age. And so, and bulimia had only been a clinical word since 1976. As a 19-year-old boy at Penn State, I had no idea what I was doing. I just knew that for that 2 seconds of that act, I felt okay about myself. I felt accepted. And I had to do it over and over and over again to keep getting that acceptance, much like what would happen with my addiction and my alcoholism. That lasted till I was 45 years old. And as a guy who was in recovery from bulimia It makes me sad because there is just so much stigma, even now. Women have come such a long way in the conversation, but for men, I mean, they're just not talking about it. And it's kind of the chicken and the egg, because the only way to get more men to talk about it is for men to talk about it, but they don't want to talk about it, right? So this is why I wanted to out myself and let people know that, hey, I'm out here. And every week I'll get an email from a guy and sometimes from women saying, thank you, I thought I was the only one. And that tells me that I'm making some progress. But so now we're back at Penn State, and I'm muddling through Penn State, and by the time I turned 21, I discovered alcohol. Woo! Yeah, I'm bulimic, I'm doing these things here, and wow, I'm now old enough to drink. Back then I was 21 years old. Never spent a sober night after that. Never spent a sober night. Plus I was binging and purging at the same time while I was drinking. Plus I had gotten into exercise bulimia, running 20 miles a day. I was so dehydrated some days at Penn State University that I couldn't get out of bed between all those destructive acts. How I made it through, I have no idea. You hear all the time of people having strokes and heart attacks, but I made it. But I'm engaging in all these destructive behaviors, and every time I look in the mirror, there's that fat 14-year-old little boy, that fat pig. And everyone I talked to in my mind had talked to my mom. Yeah, they know what I am. They can see me. Even though I'd gotten down to under 180 pounds, which at my height and build is not, you wouldn't look at me and say, well, he has an eating disorder at that weight. But weight does not define eating disorders. Most people who are bulimic are actually of weight or above weight. So I didn't look like the stereotypical eating disorder guy. And so you get affirmations. Affirmations mean acceptance. Acceptance means I'm not that fat little pig anymore. And so you keep doing it. You keep doing it, and it just adds to the fire. Well, I made it through Penn State. I don't know how I did, but I did. I didn't want to get out into the real world, because getting out into the real world meant I had to face who I was, face my self-loathing, face my lack of love of myself. I'm like, okay, I'll go to law school. I did not go to law school. I went to the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. I did not go to law school to be Clarence Darrow. I did not go to law school to change the world. I went to law school so I could isolate for 3 more years and not have to face my alcoholism, not have to face my eating disorders, not have to face the fact that I hated what I saw in the mirror every day, not have to face the fact that I had a terrible relationship with my mother over this. I just wanted to sit in a room, study, and isolate. That's all I wanted. So law school seemed like the perfect route to take. Don't do that. Don't go to law school for that reason. And I made it through Pitt Law by the skin of my teeth, because I would rather run, I would rather get drunk, I would engage in my eating disorder behavior. I still had no idea what that was, what I was going through. Then go to class and study. I studied when I had to, I didn't care, and when I went to get my diploma, they went, no, you can really have it. But I made it through. And coming out of Pitt Law, so now I come out of Pitt Law and I'm a alcoholic, untreated bulimic, clinical depression, hates his mother. I was ready to take on the world. I decided, like when I went to Penn State, I had to get out of Pittsburgh. I had to get away from my mom, had to get away from, in my mind, the bullies, because I was still, in my mind, a 13-year-old boy being bullied, because that's what I saw in the mirror every time I looked in the mirror, even though now I'm a grown adult. I'm like, okay, both my brothers by that point, now we're in 1986, both my brothers had moved to Dallas, Texas. Should we do some yoga? Because I know this is a tough story. Everyone take a deep breath, like, oh. So I moved to Dallas, Texas, and it was like throwing gasoline on a fire. It was like, poof, of addiction and eating disorders, and it got worse. Why? Because I was so ashamed. I hadn't told anyone any of this. My brothers didn't know I was an alcoholic. My brothers didn't know I had eating disorders. My parents didn't know. No one knew. I was, as far as students go, and as a young person goes, I was fairly high functioning and had a PhD in deception. a PhD that I would double and triple over the course of the next few years. So there are young guys in Dallas, right? There are young guys in Dallas, Texas back then. This is now 1986, 87. Everyone's partying, going out. It's a young town. And so I went out with them. Drunk every night, drunk every day. And I hated myself. I absolutely hated myself. I wanted so badly to tell them my pain. But guys don't talk about those things. They don't. Even my two brothers who I love and were so very close today, I just couldn't bring myself to tell them. And so I just buried it in shame. And one day, another day after looking in the mirror and saying, there's that fat little boy, I discovered cocaine. By then, in 1987, I was well on my way to being a cocaine addict. Because when I did drugs, for that 1 second, I looked in that mirror after going, and looked in that mirror, and I'm like, yeah, okay, that's the guy. You are the man, you are ready, you're gonna take on the town. But as any addict knows, when that wears off, shame, depression, there's that fat little boy again. Gotta have that feeling again, and again, and again, and again. I was a cocaine addict. Finally, moving ahead, it got to the point where I was going to my law firm, doing cocaine in a bathroom. I was doing cocaine just to get through the day. And of course, in my mind, you got to do the alcohol too to level off the cocaine, right? That's every addict knows that mixture. And to me, it was perfectly logical in the mind of a lawyer. I have to do these things because it makes me feel good, it makes me look good, even if I hate myself afterwards, got to keep having it and having it and having it. Finally, I got so depressed, so just hopeless, that I would never see anything but that fat 13-year-old bullied little boy in the mirror, that I became suicidal. In 2005, I decided I was going to take my own life. But for the timing of a few seconds, I would not be standing up here today, because I had bought the means of doing that, and I was getting ready to do it when a friend who I dedicated my book to, and who had stayed in my life, and who knew what I was going through, called my brothers, both of them, and said, you have a problem. Can you get over to see your brother? And they came into my door. You could make a movie out of it. They came into my house when I had a weapon on my nightstand, and I had gone through the mental process of ending my life. And they saved me. And they dragged me down of my not first, but the first of 2 trips to a local psychiatric facility. And I'm going down there, and I'm like, you know what? They're about to put a Britney Spears on me. So as a lawyer, I knew what to say, so they couldn't hold me. So you go back home, and like all addicts, okay, you're gonna, self-imposed rehab, okay, and the further you get from it, you're cured, right? You spend a couple weeks, it's over and up, oh, I'm cured. I was right back at it. Failed relationships, failed marriages. In the meantime, now I'm realizing that I have a problem, but I'm too afraid to deal with it. I have no one to talk to. I have no group where I could go, like Eagle Peer Recovery, or some of these groups here, where I could be with people who say, I understand, who have empathy, and who have knowledge, and say, here is the path we can give you. I had none of that, because I didn't want to tell anyone, because I was too ashamed. It might have been there to some extent back then, but I didn't want to open myself up to get it, because that would acknowledge that my mother was right. And so I met a girl. 2007, and one day she goes away for a weekend. I had hidden this from her well: drugs, alcohol, eating disorder, didn't know any of this. And she goes away, and I go out with some friends. The next thing I know, it's 3 days later. She's standing over my bed. There's cocaine everywhere. There's alcohol everywhere. She's looking down. There's a prophylactic on the floor. I'd clearly been unfaithful during that 3 days. No idea what happened. So, back to the psychiatric facility, trip number 2. Boom, back. And I'm standing in that parking lot. I'm standing in that parking lot of Green Oak Psychiatric Facility in Dallas, Texas. She's crying, and I'm thinking she's gone. I'd go too, right? But I started thinking, I don't have a third trip back here. And I had to make a change. That was my low point. Not the near suicide attempt. That was my low point, where I just realized in my heart, I just didn't have another trip. I was going to be below ground. And you know what scared me worse than that? You know what terrified me worse than that thought? Was that I felt I was dangerously close to losing my family. Because family may love you unconditionally, but if you're not willing to take a path and you're not willing to grab hold of a structure they may be willing to give you, hopefully, they may start to distance. You know, my family, you know, you try, and we all know there's a fine line between love and enablement when there's an addict in the family. And I was afraid that they would start moving away from me. They have kids, they have families, they have lives. They don't want some drug addict, bulimic hanging around their kid. I wouldn't want me either, and they never said that to me. That's just what I felt in my heart. So standing there in that parking lot in April of 2007, I said, this has to stop. And I decided it was time to take the first step in recovery, getting honest. Getting honest about where I was, getting honest about how I got there. So the next day, I went into my shrink's office. And I'd been seeing the guy for 3 years, lying. You know, people think, you know, if some psychiatrists have any weakness, it's that they assume because you're paying them, you're going to be honest with them. Shame knows no hourly rate, right? Shame has no dollar value. But I walked in that day, and I said, we got to talk. And he said, okay. I told him everything that had gone on, suicide, drugs. But I didn't tell him about the eating disorder. I was too ashamed to tell my psychiatrist about my eating disorder. And I talked to guys. I had one guy tell me not long ago, you know, he's a heroin addict. I said, I'd rather admit that I'm a heroin addict than I have an eating disorder. Okay, he had a co-occurring thing, and I get that. Because I didn't want to tell the guy I was supposed to be in a trust relationship with I had an eating disorder. I certainly didn't want my family to know. I'd rather that they clearly knew I was a drug addict at that point and an alcoholic. And so he said to me, well, what do you want to do? I said, I want to live. I want my family back. I want my life. I want to move forward in a healthy life. I was so depressed, not only because of where I was, but because of all the years in my mind I had wasted, I had thrown away, that are gone, that I would never get back, and that this was all coming together, and I didn't want to become suicidal again, so I want to do what I need to do. He said, well, we have a problem. We have all these issues we need to address that are more than just your current behaviors, but you're a freaking drug addict and an alcoholic, right? We got to get these behaviors under control so you can go back and address these other things. Getting honest about where you are, getting all these behaviors under control, then we can get honest about how we got there. So I walked in a 12-step, April 8th, 2007. There's been a lot of pain and a lot of crying and a lot of reflection and therapy since then, but I'm proud to say that I never looked back from drugs, alcohol, or eating disorders since then. So I went in a 12-step, and really that's, you know, back then I wasn't aware of you know, these peer groups and such. That was what you did. You went in a 12-step. And I will credit 12-step with this. You know, whatever else you say, I'll credit with this. It saved my life because it got me the routine of sobriety where I could clear my head. I could not deal with this other stuff unless with a clear head, right? It gave me that, and for that I am forever grateful for being in that brotherhood. But we had to keep getting honest. There had to be more honesty. The next day, I walked over to my father's house in his 70s back then. Lived right down the street from me, still does. If you want to know how close, what our father instilled in us when he would tell us brothers, brothers, brothers every day, never abandon each other, Mark, Jeff, and I and my father all live within a mile of each other all these years later. I went over his house. He knew nothing about this. I sat down. We have to talk. I told him everything but the eating disorder. Didn't tell him about the eating disorders. And I cried, and I cried, and he cried with me. And I'll never forget this. He said, Brian, come move in with me. We will get through this together. I was that 13-year-old little boy finally hearing from his father what he wanted to hear all those years ago. And that was like the weight of the world off my shoulders. And so from that point, I was able to start little steps moving forward in recovery, sometimes back, sometimes forward. I wasn't using and I was staying sober, but it was reshaping my thoughts, letting people know, letting myself know that when I look at you, you haven't talked to my mom. You don't think I'm a fat pig. Taking your shirt off at the swimming pool, it's okay. You know, taking my antidepressants, it's okay. There's no stigma. It's fine for me. That's what I need. But there was still one thing left in dealing with how I got there. My mother. My mother went through times of never speaking, long times because of this, because of blame, because of shame, because of cross-blame. In reality, there is no blame. And I was so lucky. I was so lucky because I have a mother who was willing to step into it and say, this is how I was raised. I don't want to make it not about fault, to make it not about blame, to explain to me the things her mother had done to her, the tools she was given as a young mother. And once I understood that, the blame went away. I realized it wasn't her fault. It wasn't my mother's fault. Eating disorders, addiction, we know eating disorders have a biological base and you have predispositions. And if it wasn't my mother, it could have been any number of triggers with my middle child personality that set me off. It had nothing to do with fault. I love my mother for being willing to step in for that, and she was very instrumental in my recovery for being willing to do that, because a lot of families have nothing but blame. I don't want to talk about it. It's not my fault. And when it keeps being about blame, you're not working the problem. So once I was able to get through that with my mom, it was just full speed ahead. Finally, in 2008, it's funny, I still had not come clean with my eating disorders yet. At this point, I knew I was bulimic and anorexic, that I was in recovery for that. And I'm going through the internet, and I came across the story about model Carol Ann Reston, how she had passed away from complications to anorexia. And I don't know why that triggered something in me. And I said, I just can't feel like I'm alone anymore. There have to be guys going through this. And now this is 2008 and the internet exists, but and I'm a lawyer, I was too afraid to go on the internet and search male eating disorders because I'd find out I was the only one. That's the shame, that's the stigma that guys go through. And I wasn't. I saw, wow, I'm not alone. I am not alone. I have to let people know that they are not alone. But I didn't want to tell people and face judgment, because in my mind that I just wasn't ready for that. So I did the next best thing. I wrote a blog about it. Before I told my shrink, for my family, I wrote a blog and said, I'm a recovering bulimic. And it's one of those things where you can write it and just put it out there, and whoever reads it, okay, and you don't have to worry about the repercussions. No one's going to get in your face and say, yeah, whatever. So I wrote a blog about it. Once I wrote that blog, then I told my psychiatrist. After I told my psychiatrist, I told my family. And I decided that there are so many men suffering out there who feel like they're all alone. Women too, whether it's addiction, whether it's alcoholism, whether it's eating disorders. That's why I decided to write my book, to pay it forward and to give people the experience of my pain. And let them know that there is recovery if you are willing to, what I do take it the 3 E's. You have empathy, education, and empowerment. We all have the ability. We run out of time?
No, yes, that's my snap for you.
Empathy, education, and empowerment. We all have the ability. Most people everyone in this room is aware of what the deal is with addiction and alcohol. But we're all going to be in situations where people don't know what the deal is. I think it's incumbent upon us to take the responsibility to be empathetic to their suffering so they know they're not alone, whether it's alcoholism, depression, addiction, eating disorders, because from my personal experience, that's the first step it was for me in getting help, real recovery, to know I wasn't alone. And once we share that empathy, we share our education and we educate ourselves. What are the options? What are the Eagle peer recovery options on campus? What are the other options? And once you share those other options, you have now laid a road to empower somebody to recover if they want to take it. And I'm going to leave you all with this. Remember that sticks and stones is a bunch of BS. Okay, words do permanent damage. And you may meet someone who is able to let it roll off them. Some teens can let it roll off them. Some children can let it roll off them. But a lot of kids are shy and quiet and just want acceptance. And they will internalize those kind of things. And they may keep them to themselves. I had a father come up to me one time and say, you know what, Brian, that's nice you talk about bullying. My dad taught me to punch him in the nose, you hope metaphorically, and I'm going to teach my kid to punch him in the nose because that's what worked for me. That's going to work for my kid, that'll work for their kids. And I said to him, sir, I'm not telling you how to raise your kids. You might be right. Maybe your child is of that aggressive mentality and stand up for yourself mentality. And we do have to teach our children acceptable ways to stand up to bullies. There is no doubt about that. But what if your child is like me? What if your daughter's like me? Shy, quiet, just wants acceptance. You know what you're risking? They're never going to tell you a thing again because they will not know how to incorporate what you have told them into their psychological makeup. So they will internalize it. They will hide it, and it may come out somewhere. Addiction, alcoholism, cutting, eating disorders. And it may not happen until they've left the house. And then you have lost the ability to empower them to recover because then it's mom and dad, leave me alone. I'm not drinking. I'm doing fine. My eating habits are fine. So I'll leave you with, when you get that opportunity, remember the 3 E's and help people move forward. Thank you.
Keep that going. So if we have some time, if you're willing, we'd love to open up some
questions.
Yes,
questions and answers, please. I'm an open book.
I'll get this out for those that are a little more quiet.
I can speak loud enough, I think. Can y'all hear me?
What? Speak up, sir.
Why is it okay to tell men, and maybe it's just my age, I don't know what it is, but for some reason people think it's okay to call me fat. And it happens, we actually have some mutual friends that do it. My dad still does that.
It's a generational thing. I mean, it's a generational thing for a lot of people. And I think that kind of talk will only be cured generationally by what we teach our children. You know, I try not to correct people with something like that because if it is generational, because it's not going to get you anywhere. It's going to get someone defensive. But I think it's incumbent on us to teach our children that those kind of words, you know, have no upside. Yes?
I have a question. Thank you so much for sharing. And I think I remember the first time you wrote on your blog about that, or when you had just started and I had just discovered it. I remember I reached out to you to come speak at the University of Texas when I was still working.
That's right, yes.
Yeah, and you were so gracious. You were so willing to do it. And then we had a big initiative shift occur, and so I never was able to follow through with you on that. But I just wanted to thank you for that. And then I just also wanted to say that you're so fearless when you write. It's incredible. Like, where do you get that talent from, your writing?
I did very poorly in my math SATs, very well in my writing SATs. That's always been, you know, I don't know if that's left brain or right brain, but that's always been what I was about, writing. And I'm a very emotional person. I'll cry at movie trailers, you know, and it's all wrapped up in the same thing of expressiveness. That's my strength.
And then I also wanted to ask you, like, what is it like living in recovery today? Freedom from your eating disorder, freedom from the drug and the alcohol addiction, freedom from
It's wonderful. I see nothing but possibilities. I'll be on, do I now and then tend to get reflective and look back and say, man, here's where I am. Where could I have been if I hadn't done these things? Sure, I mean, I think that's just natural in people. But I don't let it define me. I mean, I let moving forward every day define me. I let all of you define me. You know, I let the ability to change lives, I'd like to think so, define me. And I find great joy in that.
So, two things, a comment first, and it's really to Steve, who asked that question. It's not okay, and you're a beautiful human being, regardless of, I don't know who those people are, and I really don't care, but you're wonderful just the way you are. And I value that you're in my life, and I just want to tell you that, to affirm who you are. The question for you, and I love the 3 E's, and I'm sorry I snapped, it's like I hang out with Greek life.
Well, I didn't know if you were telling me I was running out of time.
You clap.
Yeah, I didn't know if you were telling me I was running out of time.
The best part of his story, you're like, hey.
Yeah, absolutely. No, the 3 E's, and I think empathy, education, and empowerment, it aligns so closely with what we do here at UNT and the model for our program, especially the social empowerment. Because that's a phrase that we use quite often, because we empowering people in their recovery to find that freedom and harness it and really continue to grow. Speaking out now, speaking around the country and in press and in media, as well as to students and various groups, as you've done more and more, and you've continued, I think, empower yourself and you get more free, how beneficial is that now for your program or your pathway to recovery? Is that such an integral piece?
Absolutely. You all empower my recovery. Every time I speak empowers my recovery. Every time I get someone that comes up to me afterwards and talks about what they're going through and how, you know, they identify with some of the things I said, that empowers my recovery. We empower each other. It takes a village.
You know, I personally, I'm a critic, okay? I could write for the Times. I thought you're going to be a very well speaker for a long time.
Oh, thank you.
Your job so well
Thank you.
done. I'm so glad I'm on the front row. But do you have a sponsor? You sponsor people? You got a home group? You go to meetings?
I do have a home group here as Preston Group in Dallas. I mean, I'm a blunt person, and I'll tell you why I don't sponsor people. Because my 12-step route to recovery is not one that I would want to sponsor people with. I would want people to go through the traditional route for some different reasons I can talk to you about personally. But I don't sponsor people for that reason, because I did not embrace every aspect of 12-step. Yes?
I think it was 1986, Men's Fitness, hit, and then we have Abercrombie and Fitch. What I'm getting at is media has started showing images to young men
Sure.
about perfect bodies, and that's what I'm supposed to look like. Do you think that, what do you think the impact of media is on the...
It's a great question. Here's my philosophy on that. I do not personally believe the media causes body image issues. It is one factor in many that cause body image issues. I mean, we say genetic loads the gun, environment pulls the trigger. Environment is a lot of stuff, okay? And media is just one aspect. What I think this explosion of images has done, okay, everyone's got to look like the Spartan from this, and women have to look like this. I think what it has done is lowered the societal set point of normative discontent. Okay, and what normative discontent is, well, we all look in the mirror. Every one of us has looked in the mirror someday and say, oh man, I just can't deal with that. I'm just not going to deal with that. I'm not going to this event. I got a zit. It's just not happening. I'm not happening today, right? We've all had that. That's not a disorder. That's normative discontent that everyone goes through. But I think what you're talking about, we've lowered the set point where people who would be otherwise just normative discontent can now be triggered into disorders. It's come down. Does that make sense? I think that's what's happened. We have more people who would not otherwise have been triggered at that moment being triggered.
So take one more, if anybody has one.
Yes?
Oh.
I just wanted to thank you so much. It's also very relieving for me. It was I had many attempts in treatment where it always passed under the radar, where alcohol and drugs were not in the picture, but no one ever, like, you're a guy, that would never happen, and that there were many relapses because of it.
You talking about an ED?
Yes, absolutely. Eating disorder.
Yeah, well,
But bulimia to passing out, like, I consider myself a miracle. It's almost been almost 14 years. And
That's great. And
It's like I don't want to applause. I almost feel like it's an absolute miracle because the meetings that I ever went to were all surrounded by women.
and that's a problem today. I was just talking to someone else. I mean, beds for men are tough. Beds for men are tough. We were just talking. I mean, there's, I think, only one facility in Dallas that has beds that do. We were debating whether they even have beds for men. So there are facilities out there, but with beds for men, but there aren't as many as we like. But it's growing. It's growing, and I'm glad you're young. I'm glad you got into recovery young, because I don't want people to wait as long as I did. My life has been shortened. Okay, my lifespan has been shortened because of what I did to myself and how long I've waited. There is no doubt in my mind. I have physical issues now from both eating disorders and addiction that will shorten my life. I just don't know how much. And I'll live every day, paying it forward until whenever that is. So don't wait, don't wait till you're 45 years old. Reach out, empower, get people to take interest now, right here at UNT.
So my boss raised his hand, so I don't get reprimanded later. We'll let
Okay.
the last question.
Are you referencing me?
Yes,
Oh, wow.
sir.
You have a lot of bosses.
Yeah, that's true. One of my
Surely there's
bosses.
somebody, yeah. Where can we point people to? Like people that are curious or interested in, and maybe I'm already supposed to know this and I'm failing at my job or something. But if somebody asked me, hey, I'm really interested in going to find out, do I need help or how do I?
What you mean from an eating disorder standpoint?
Yeah.
NEDA is a great place to start. National Eating Disorder Organization, great place to start, because they can, on their website is they answer to pretty much every permutation of question about eating disorders. That is always the first place to start.
Yeah. And then a follow-up question to that, I could sound really incorrect, are there also, or does it matter, special or specialized or customized things for young people also? Does that matter? Like how young?
Yes, there's college campuses there's Project Heal out of New York that started by two wonderful young girls, and they give scholarships to people who cannot afford eating disorder treatment.
Oh, wow. There's Project Heal?
Project Heal is a great place to start, and that's where you'll find a lot of the college kids and young people.
Okay.
I highly recommend them.
I'm sorry, I have one more question. I'm sorry. Okay, out of 4,500 college campuses in America, there's currently only 112 collegiate recovery efforts and programs going on. So what that means is that there are hundreds of thousands of students suffering without support
Sure.
on their college campus. Would you be willing, as you continue to speak, to bring awareness to that as well?
I'm always willing to do whatever I can to make sure one less person suffers. My life is devoted to that. I walked away from the practice of law to devote my life to that.
So a small token of our appreciation, and I promise you it's small, but I want to thank you not only for speaking today, but since we've met, you've become one of the biggest advocates for what we do at the University of North Texas, and I've been approached by people on social media and in person that know who we are because of your efforts of talking about us, wearing the Party Sober shirt, retweeting us, whatever that may be, to bring awareness to collegiate recovery for young adults, and I can't thank you enough. And on behalf of the rehab department and myself in the collegiate recovery program, Eagle Peer Recovery, please accept that and
Thank you. Well, I can't thank you enough for allowing me to be a part of it.
Thank you.